In a world where truth is buried beneath layers of power and corruption, one man stands at the crossroads of justice and self-preservation. Judge Marcus Williams never imagined his fight for justice would cost him everything, but when the system he's trusted betrays him, the real battle begins. Will he expose the truth no matter the cost, or will the darkness consume him? The clock is ticking and the stakes have never been higher. In every city, under the glaring lights and the quiet streets, there are stories that never make the headlines. Stories of tension, of fear, of human beings at their breaking point. The kind of stories that speak volumes without uttering a single word. Judge Marcus Williams had seen it all: bribery, corruption, injustice, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. After a long day in the courtroom, where he had fought to defend what was right, to preserve the law that he so deeply believed in, he was just another man heading home. Or so he thought. It was a strange feeling, a sense of being watched, that crept over Judge Williams. Something in the way the officer stood there, almost as if waiting, felt off. But Judge Williams had learned long ago to keep his head down, to not engage with the shadows of the world. But tonight was different. Tonight the shadows had found him. Officer Richards, mockingly, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "Can I help you, sir, or should I ask if you're lost?" Judge Williams, calmly, "I'm fine, officer, just heading home." Judge Williams had learned the art of keeping his composure in the face of adversity. He had been tested time and time again in the courtroom, faced countless adversaries, and yet this felt different. There was a chill in the officer's voice, something unmistakable, something more than just a random interaction. Officer Richards, with a low chuckle, "You really think you belong here? Behind that robe, what are you really? A man who shouldn't have been in this position in the first place." The words cut through the air like a blade. It wasn't just a question, it was a challenge that carried with it the weight of history, the ghosts of 1,000 injustices that had been buried beneath the surface of the city's polished streets. Judge Williams, his voice steady but firm, "I'm not sure what you mean, officer, but if this is about me being a judge, my credentials speak for themselves." Officer Richards, mockingly, "Your credentials? The system's rigged, Marcus. You know it. It's no surprise they put a guy like you in charge. But you don't belong in this world. You never did. You're just here to fill a quota." It was in that moment that Judge Williams realized this wasn't just about him being a judge. This was something deeper, something personal. The officer's words weren't just attacks on his career, they were attacks on his very identity, his worth, his place in a world that, for so long, had told him he didn't belong. Judge Williams, his voice unwavering, "That's not who I am, and it's not who you think I am." Judge Williams could feel the pull of the officer's hate, the way it seeped into his every word, his every movement, but he knew one thing for sure: he wouldn't let this moment define him. He wouldn't give the officer the satisfaction of seeing him break. Officer Richards, with a final sneer, "We'll see how long your word lasts, Judge. It's only a matter of time." As the officer disappears into the night, the silence that follows is deafening. Judge Williams stands there, caught between the calm exterior he had so carefully crafted and the storm that now churns within him. But there's something else too, something darker, a question, a realization. Why had Officer Richards, someone he once knew, turned into this? Why had that hate taken root so deeply in him, and how far would it go? The encounter was just the beginning, but in the shadows of that brief interaction, something much larger was taking shape, something neither of them could have predicted, and the truth? The truth would soon come crashing down on them both. The night air hung heavy, as if the world itself held its breath. Judge Marcus Williams sat in his car, staring out the windshield, the echo of Officer Richards' words still lingering in his mind. They had come out of nowhere, like a slap to the face, leaving him reeling with disbelief. But as much as he tried to push it away, he knew deep down that the officer's words weren't just a personal attack, they were a warning. It wasn't just about him. It never had been. He understood that now. The officer's venom was about more than one man, more than one confrontation. It was about the system, the deep-seated beliefs that still festered in the hearts of so many. Officer Richards had revealed something far more sinister than his own personal prejudice. He had given Judge Williams a glimpse into a world he had hoped was behind him, a world of hate, of injustice, of racial tension so thick it threatened to consume everything in its path.
As much as Judge Williams wanted to push the events of the previous night out of his mind, he couldn't escape the weight of it. His position in the courthouse, the respect he had earned over the years, felt like a fragile thing now, as though one misstep could unravel it all. But he had a job to do, justice to uphold. Judge Williams walks into his chambers, where his assistant, Maria, greets him with a polite smile. But as she hands him the stack of paperwork for the day, there's an odd shift in the air. She hesitates for just a moment, her eyes flicking nervously to the door before returning to her task. Maria. Softly, Judge, there's a situation in the parking lot. A police officer came by earlier, said he needed to speak to you. He didn't leave a name, but he hesitates. He was very insistent. Maria's hesitation doesn't go unnoticed. Judge Williams raises an eyebrow, a flash of concern crossing his face. His mind immediately goes back to the previous night. Officer Richards, his mocking tone, his sharp words. What could the officer possibly want now? What game was he playing? The officer's presence is enough to send a ripple of tension through the air. But there's something else now, something far more dangerous than the night before. Officer Richards has brought backup. 2 more uniformed officers, their eyes scanning the surroundings, their posture stiff and guarded. It's clear that they aren't here to talk. Officer Richards told Judge Williams, "I didn't expect to see you here so early. We need to have a little chat." Judge Williams, eyes narrowing. "What is this about, officer? I thought we had already spoken." Officer Richards, his smile faltering, but the sneer returns. "Oh, we're just making sure everything's in order, Judge. You see, there have been some complaints, some concerns about your conduct, about how things are done around here. People are starting to ask questions. The words hit like a gut punch. Complaints? Concerns?" Judge Williams had been nothing but fair in his rulings.
He had worked tirelessly to ensure that justice was served, no matter the case, no matter the person. But now, standing here in the middle of the parking lot, he is beginning to understand what this really is. It's not about complaints, it's not about justice, it's a power play, an attempt to undermine him, to strip away the very foundation of his career. Officer Richards, whispering, just loud enough for the judge to hear, "You've made some powerful enemies, Judge. You think people are really going to stand by and let you keep doing what you're doing? You're a target whether you know it or not." But Judge Williams refuses to back down. He stands tall. The weight of the years he's spent on the bench giving him strength, giving him the resolve to face whatever this is head-on. He knows what's at stake, and he won't let these officers, this system of intimidation, break him. Judge Williams, voice firm, unwavering, "I will not be intimidated, Officer Richards. If you have something to say, say it. Otherwise, I suggest you leave." The air between them crackles with tension. For a moment, no one moves. The other officers remain silent, their expressions unreadable. Officer Richards stares at Judge Williams, his eyes narrowing as if trying to gauge whether the judge will fold. In that moment, time seems to stand still. The world around them disappears, just the 2 of them, locked in this silent battle of wills. But the officer doesn't break. Instead, he leans in closer, his voice now a low, threatening growl. "Officer Richards, barely above a whisper, we'll see how long you last. You may have won the court battles, but this is a different game, and you won't win this one. Trust me." As the officers disappear into the distance, Judge Williams feels the weight of their words, the realization sinking in. This wasn't just about one officer's hatred, it was about a system, a network of power that sought to bring him down. And the question lingers in the air: how far would they go? How far would Officer Richards go? The stakes were higher than ever, and Judge Williams knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next few days were a blur for Judge Marcus Williams. The courthouse, once a place of law and order, now felt like a battlefield. Every time he walked into his chambers, every time he stepped into a courtroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Officer Richards' words from that morning kept echoing in his head. "We'll see how long you last. You may have won the court battles, but this is a different game." It's a message from an anonymous source. "You're not safe. Richards is making his move. He's more dangerous than you think." Judge Williams' grip tightens on the phone. His pulse quickens as he reads the message over and over again, trying to make sense of it. The warning feels ominous, like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. He can't ignore it, not anymore. As if the tension wasn't high enough now, a feeling of dread washes over him. Officer Richards stands there, arms crossed, flanked by two more officers. But there's something different today, something unmistakable about their posture. The way they stand in silent defiance, it's as if they've crossed some invisible line. Judge Williams walks toward them, his steps slow and deliberate. The officer's eyes follow him with an intensity that cuts through the air. As he gets closer, Officer Richards steps forward, a cruel smile curling at the corners of his lips. Officer Richards told, "Good morning, Judge. You look tired. You sure everything's all right?" Judge Williams told. "What do you want, officer? This needs to stop. You've made your point. I've heard your threats, but I will not be intimidated." What Judge Williams didn't know, what no one could have known, was that this wasn't just a war of words anymore. Officer Richards had made his move, and this time there would be no turning back. The line had already been crossed. Officer Richards whispering, a deadly sneer on his face. "You think you're untouchable, don't you, Judge? You think just because you wear that robe, you can do whatever you want? Well, I'm here to remind you of something. I can take you down, and I will." Officer Richards, lowering his voice, almost a growl. "Your career, your life, it's over. The people you've tried to protect, the ones you've put on the stand, the ones you've tried to give a voice to, they know nothing about you. You think you've done good? You think your life means something? All I have to do is pull the right strings, push the right buttons, and you'll be nothing." In that moment, Judge Williams realized the true nature of Officer Richards' threats. They weren't just idle words, they were a calculated move, a move designed to break him, mentally, emotionally, and professionally. Richards wasn't just trying to ruin him. Judge Williams, voice rising, but still steady. "You've crossed the line, Richards. This is not a game. You may think you can intimidate me, but you have no idea who you're dealing with. I will not be silenced." Officer Richards, whispering, "We'll see, Judge. We'll see how long your career lasts when the truth comes out. You're no better than the rest of them. All I have to do is tell the world who you really are, and trust me, the world will listen." As the officers disappear into the distance, the weight of their words lingers. It's no longer just about one officer's vendetta. This was something much larger, much more dangerous. Officer Richards had crossed the line, pushing the boundaries of law and justice into something darker, something twisted. And as Judge Williams watches them walk away, he knows one thing for certain. This fight is far from over. In fact, it's just beginning. The days that followed were some of the most unsettling of Judge Marcus Williams's life. The tension in the courthouse was palpable, thickened by the knowledge that something was brewing just beneath the surface. Officer Richards' threats echoed in his mind, but it wasn't just the officer's words that haunted him, it was the question of why. Why was Richards going to such extremes? What had driven him to target someone like Judge Williams? In the silence of his office, Marcus begins to dig deeper. He knows something is wrong, but the pieces don't fit together. Every lead he's followed, every whisper he's heard, has pointed him to one person, Officer Richards. But what was driving the officer's obsession with him? Was it just personal animosity, or was there something more? And then he finds it. A name that sends a shiver down his spine. It's a name he's heard only in passing, a name tied to a dark chapter of his past, a name that was supposed to be buried, forgotten, Elijah Cooper. The name hits Marcus like a punch to the gut. It's not just a coincidence. Elijah Cooper was the brother of a man Marcus had once defended in court, his own childhood friend, Michael Cooper. Marcus had fought for Michael, won his case, and had seen his life change. But Elijah had been a casualty of the same broken system he had spent his career trying to fix. Marcus sits back in his chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. This wasn't just some petty vendetta, this was far more personal. Richards wasn't targeting him because of his position as a judge, he was targeting him because of something far more sinister, a history, a deep-seated hatred fueled by something long buried. Judge Williams whispers to himself, Elijah. The realization crashes over him like a wave. Officer Richards wasn't just a rogue officer with a personal vendetta, he was a man driven by revenge, someone who had lost everything, someone who had been part of a system that took everything from him. And now Marcus was the face of that system. The tangled web of revenge, loss, and power had come full circle. Elijah Cooper's death had never been just a tragedy. It had been a catalyst, one that would ignite the flames of resentment in Officer Richards, a man who had been scarred by the system, by the injustice he had been a part of, and now Marcus had become the target of that fury. The shocking revelation left Marcus in a state of shock and disbelief. He had spent his entire career fighting for justice, yet the very system he had trusted to protect him had played a role in the destruction of someone else's life, and now he was caught in the crossfire. He couldn't just stand by and let this continue. He couldn't let Officer Richards use his personal vendetta to tear apart everything Marcus had worked for. But how far would Richards go, and what would Marcus be willing to risk in order to expose the truth? As the weight of the situation settles in, Marcus knows one thing for certain. The battle for his life and career has just become a battle for something far more dangerous and far more personal, the truth. The air in Judge Marcus Williams' office feels thick, almost suffocating. The walls close in as the revelation about Officer Richards and Elijah Cooper lingers in his mind, like a shadow that refuses to fade. The system he'd trusted, the justice he'd spent his entire career fighting for, now it all felt like an illusion. Every decision, every case he had worked on, seemed meaningless in the face of this raw, unrelenting truth. Officer Richards wasn't just a rogue cop. He was a man whose pain and vengeance were rooted in something far deeper than Marcus could have ever imagined. It was time to confront the past, time to speak to someone who had been there, someone who had known Elijah Cooper and Michael Cooper, someone who could fill in the missing pieces. The phone call connects, and Marcus takes a deep breath before speaking. Judge Williams, on phone. Mr. Harris, it's Marcus. I need to talk. It's about Elijah Cooper. I need to know everything you know. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to a man Marcus had turned to for advice more than once during his early years as a lawyer. Harris was one of the few who had always spoken the truth, no matter how hard it was to hear. As Marcus's thoughts rushed back to that time, a voice in his head whispered the unspoken reality of everything that had unfolded in the years since. Mr. Harris, on phone, Marcus, you don't know the whole story. You never did. Elijah's death. It wasn't just another case of police brutality. It was bigger than that. You were too young to understand back then, but I think you're ready to hear it now. Marcus felt the weight of Mr. Harris's words land heavily in his chest. He had always known that Elijah's case had been buried under the rug, the investigation sabotaged by powerful forces within the police department. But to hear that there was more, something deeper, something bigger, Marcus knew this was a moment of reckoning. It was time to face the truth. The courthouse had always felt like home, a place where Marcus had found his purpose. But now it felt like a prison. Every step he took, every glance from the bailiffs and clerks felt like a reminder of how little he truly knew about the system he had devoted his life to. How many cases had he presided over, not knowing the strings being pulled behind the scenes? How many corrupt deals had been made in the shadows? Something was wrong. Marcus could feel it. It was in the way the officers avoided his gaze, the subtle tension in the room, as if everyone knew something he didn't. But what was it? The unease gnawed at him as he took his seat at the bench. The courtroom settled into a tense silence, but Marcus was barely able to focus. The weight of the truth was suffocating him. Maria. Quietly, Judge, I don't know how to say this, but I think you should see this. I found something on my desk this morning. The file contains surveillance footage, something Marcus hadn't expected to see. It's a recording of a meeting between Officer Richards and a high-ranking official from the police department, one Marcus knows well. The conversation is chilling. Richards is seen in the footage talking about ways to discredit Marcus, to ruin him publicly. But there's something worse. There's mention of Elijah Cooper again, and a plot to use Marcus as a pawn in a far-reaching conspiracy. A conspiracy to protect the police force from the consequences of its actions. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was a carefully orchestrated plan, one that had been in motion for years. Officer Richards and his allies had been manipulating the situation, using Marcus as a scapegoat to cover up the corruption and abuse within the department. Elijah Cooper had been the first victim in a long line of injustices, victims whose voices had been silenced by the very system Marcus had sworn to protect. As the truth finally begins to unravel before him, Marcus realizes the depth of his involvement in a game he never intended to play. He had been blind to the cracks in the system, had failed to see how the powerful forces within the police department were working against everything he had ever stood for. The truth had been there all along, buried in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to surface. And now that it had, Marcus knew he couldn't back down. He had to expose the truth, no matter the cost. Because if he didn't, everything he had fought for would be lost. The battle for justice had become a battle for his own survival. The days following the discovery of the conspiracy felt like a slow-motion descent into chaos. The walls of the courthouse, once a symbol of justice, now seemed like the thickest of prisons. Judge Marcus Williams had uncovered the darkest of truths, truths that connected Officer Richards, the corrupt network in the police department, and his own painful past. But he wasn't just going to sit back and let this injustice fester. The time for action had come. Marcus had spent countless hours assembling the pieces of this puzzle, knowing that every move from here on out would have to be precise. One misstep and everything he had uncovered would be swept under the rug, buried once again by the very people who had orchestrated it. There was no turning back now. Marcus had a choice. He could expose the truth and risk everything, or he could stay silent and let the conspiracy run its course. But the weight of the decision was simple. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the countless lives that had been ruined by a corrupt system, a system that had been allowed to thrive because good people like him had turned a blind eye. He couldn't be complicit in that any longer. Judge Williams told, "I know everything, Bill. I know about the cover-up, about Elijah Cooper, about Officer Richards, and I know that you've been involved in keeping this hidden." Chief Investigator Carter, surprised, defensive. "Marcus, you don't understand. I've tried, okay? I've been trying to fix things from the inside, but Richards, he's untouchable. You don't know what he's capable of." The truth wasn't always as clear as it seemed. Sometimes, the very people you trusted the most can be the ones who betray you the hardest. Marcus had placed his faith in Carter, believing that they both stood for the same ideals, but now the facade was crumbling. Carter had been playing a dangerous game, a game that Marcus had almost been too blind to see. Judge Williams told you were supposed to be the one who stood for justice, Bill. You were supposed to be the one who took down the corrupt, not cover for them. This wasn't about fixing things from the inside. This was about protecting your own interests. Chief Investigator Carter told, "You don't get it, Marcus. Richards is dangerous. He has ties. He has power you can't even imagine. If we expose him, everything we've worked for, everything we've built, will come crashing down. People will die. You'll die." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. For the first time, he sees Carter not as a partner in the fight for justice, but as someone who's been compromised by fear. The idea of facing the truth, of risking everything to bring down someone like Richards, has broken him. But Marcus isn't backing down now, Judge Williams told. "No more excuses, Bill. I'm exposing the truth. You can either help me or you can step aside." "But you won't stop me." Chief Investigator Carter told, "I can't stop you, but I can help you. You've always been a better man than me, Marcus. I just wanted to protect you from what's coming. But if you're going to do this, I'll back you up." The confrontation had reached its boiling point. In that room, in that moment, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't let fear rule him any longer. He couldn't let the powerful forces that had sought to silence him win. The pieces were finally in place. Marcus had confronted the darkness within the system, and now, with the evidence he had painstakingly gathered and Carter's reluctant support, he was ready to expose the truth. It was no longer just about bringing down Officer Richards. It was about dismantling a corrupt empire that had been built on lies, manipulation, and fear. The message is short, its meaning clear, its implications terrifying. You can't stop this. The truth will destroy you. For a moment, Marcus hesitates. He looks at the file on his screen, the culmination of everything he's uncovered. It's the truth, and it's his weapon. But the cost of exposing it seems to grow with every passing second. Lives will be ruined, and some may never recover. And then there's the looming question: will he be able to protect those he loves, those who stand by him? Officer Richards, voice low and menacing. "You think you've won, Judge? You think you can bring this down with a few files? You have no idea who you're dealing with. You've already lost." The words hang in the air. There's no turning back now. Richards steps into the room, his presence like a storm about to break. The truth that Marcus has fought for, the justice he's strived to expose, is now within his grasp. But so is the danger. Marcus knows one thing for sure. There's no escaping this moment. It's now or never. But the question remains, will the truth set him free or will it bury him? And then, just as the silence is about to shatter, the lights flicker. What would you do in Marcus's shoes? Would you risk it all to expose the truth, or would you protect yourself from the storm brewing around you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heart-pounding stories like this one.